Disclaimer: this video depicts a slow burn, age gap romance. All interactions are respectful, emotional, and YouTube safe. Viewer discretion is advised for sensitive themes of romantic tension. She lingered near him longer than anyone else that
I
night,
just love spending time
sparking
with
a
you.
quiet, undeniable connection that neither of them
It feels like we're
expected.
the only ones
In
here.
this slow burn romance, every glance, every subtle touch, and every lingering moment tells a story of emotional intimacy, vulnerability, and the thrill of forbidden attraction. Experience a journey where patience, understanding, and heartfelt connection outweigh words, and where love blossoms in the smallest, most meaningful gestures. Revolving Hearts keywords and themes: age gap romance, older woman, younger man, forbidden attraction, slow burn romance, emotional intimacy, YouTube romance story, subtle affection, non-sexual romantic tension. Watch the full story to see how a single night changes everything. Link in description. Hashtag age gap romance, hashtag older woman, younger man, hashtag forbidden attraction, hashtag slow burn romance, hashtag emotional intimacy, hashtag YouTube romance, hashtag subtle affection, hashtag romantic story, hashtag YouTube storytime, hashtag heartfelt connection. The evening had the familiar hum of a casual gathering. Soft laughter spilling from the living room, the faint clink of glasses, and the subtle aroma of roasted coffee and fresh pastries lingering in the air. He had arrived expecting nothing more than a pleasant night of conversation and polite nods, but something about the atmosphere felt different. Not just the gentle warmth of the room or the flickering light that played along the walls, but a quiet tension in the air he couldn't immediately name. That's when he saw her. She wasn't in the center of attention, didn't command the room with force, yet somehow the space around her seemed to pause. She stood near the bookshelf, her posture relaxed but deliberate, a soft elegance in the way she held herself. There was a confidence about her that didn't shout. It simply existed, a calm certainty that drew his gaze. Her dress, simple yet refined, flowed with her movements, catching the soft glow of the lamp in the corner. A subtle fragrance, something floral, warm, faintly spiced, reached him even from across the room, a scent that seemed to wrap itself gently around his awareness. He noticed the small details that most people would overlook. The way she tilted her head slightly as she listened, her eyes flicking briefly to the people she was speaking to, then subtly back toward him. The soft curve of her smile as she acknowledged a comment, a sound that lingered in the air longer than it should, like the tail of a melody that refuses to end. She moved through the room with ease, yet every step seemed intentional, a quiet rhythm he found himself unconsciously mirroring. And then came the moment that anchored him in the present. She lingered near him longer than anyone else that night, not intrusively, not with obvious intention, but with a presence that made the edges of the room blur. For a heartbeat, the chatter around them faded. He became aware of the warmth radiating from her, of the way her proximity made his pulse thrum just a little faster. The slightest brush of her hand against the armrest as she reached for a glass caught him off guard. Yet it wasn't awkward. It was charged with a quiet electricity, a sensation that hummed under the surface of the ordinary evening. He felt a rush of hesitation mixed with curiosity. Who was she really, beyond the graceful posture and the composed smile? There was something undeniably magnetic in the way she observed him, a silent acknowledgement that left him both unsettled and deeply intrigued. And in that moment, he realized that this night, mundane as it might have seemed, was already different. She had changed it without a word, without a deliberate act, simply by existing in the space beside him a little longer than anyone else had dared. As he adjusted his posture and tried to reclaim the composure of someone unshaken, a thought lingered in his mind, unbidden but persistent. Perhaps this evening was going to be far more consequential than he could have imagined. The initial spark lingered in his mind like the soft echo of a half-remembered song. He kept catching glimpses of her across the room, her presence quietly magnetic, as though the room had grown smaller around the space she occupied. It wasn't long before chance nudged them together. Perhaps it was at the corner table where the wine glasses were arranged, or when he reached for a plate of hors d'oeuvres at the exact same moment she did. Their hands brushed lightly, just a fleeting touch, but enough to send a subtle shiver up his arm, a tiny jolt that made him acutely aware of her nearness. She looked at him then, her gaze steady, and in that instant, the soft hum of conversation around them seemed to fade. He noticed the gentle tilt of her head, the way her eyes caught the light, warm and luminous, holding a kind of quiet curiosity. Her smile was not forced or flirtatious, but genuine, small, and quietly inviting. An acknowledgement of this shared moment without words. For him, the effect was immediate. He felt his chest tighten just a little, his senses sharper, as though the air between them carried a weight that had gone unnoticed before. He became conscious of every detail. The warmth of her skin as their fingers brushed, the subtle scent of her perfume that clung to the air around her, the soft cadence of her voice when she commented on something trivial. Yet somehow it felt intimate, as if she was speaking directly to him, even when she was not. They fell into an easy rhythm of conversation, surprisingly natural for two strangers at a social gathering. He noticed her laughter carried a kind of warmth that spread through the space, not loud or demanding attention, but lingering in his mind long after it happened. When she leaned slightly closer to hear him over the soft music, the proximity made his pulse stutter, not from desire alone, but from the sudden intimacy of shared space. It was a closeness that was safe, yet tantalizing, like the gentle brush of a breeze that hints at a storm to come. And yet, the attraction was tempered by a quiet hesitation. He was aware of the age difference, the life experiences she carried, and a subtle fear of overstepping some invisible boundary. Still, the pull was undeniable. He found himself listening more intently, his thoughts sharpened, attuned to the rhythm of her speech, the slight gestures of her hands, the soft lift of her brow. Each movement seemed to carry unspoken meaning, a language of attention and recognition that required no words. In that short span of time, something unspoken settled between them, a quiet acknowledgement of curiosity, a gentle recognition of each other's presence, and a shared sense of the unusual comfort found in unexpected connection. She lingered near him longer than any other guest, and it was impossible not to notice, impossible not to be affected. Every glance, every fleeting touch, every subtle inflection in her tone became a thread, weaving them closer in ways he hadn't anticipated. By the time he stepped back, realizing the conversation had lasted longer than he intended, he felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and restraint. This was not merely chance. It felt deliberate, though delicate, like the first brush of sunlight on cold skin. Gentle, fleeting, yet impossible to ignore. The night had a way of bending time, stretching ordinary moments into something that felt charged with possibility. He found himself wandering toward a quiet corner of the room, almost unconsciously, and there she was again, standing near the window, looking out at the soft glow of the streetlights, the city muted under the hush of evening. She didn't turn immediately when he approached, but when she did, her gaze met his with a calm curiosity that made him aware of every inch of space between them. Their conversation began casually, remarks about the evening, the music, the warmth of the room, but soon it deepened without either of them noticing. Her voice carried an easy confidence, yet beneath it was a vulnerability that hinted at experiences lived and lessons learned. He found himself listening not just to the words, but to the subtle inflections, the pauses, the way her eyes softened when she mentioned something personal. Every small detail drew him closer, both mentally and physically. At one point, he leaned slightly to hear her better, and their shoulders brushed. It was a minor touch, fleeting, but it resonated with quiet intensity. The warmth of her presence seemed to seep into him, a comforting weight that was both thrilling and grounding. She laughed softly at a shared observation, and he became aware of how her proximity made him hyper-conscious of his own gestures, how he adjusted his stance, how he measured the tilt of his head, how he dared not move too abruptly, for fear of breaking the delicate tension that hung between them. He noticed the way she observed the room from their shared vantage point, her attention lingering on moments others might overlook. And yet, when her gaze returned to him, there was a subtle shift, an acknowledgement that she had chosen to focus here, on him. He felt the pull of unspoken questions, a curiosity about her life, her thoughts, the experiences that had shaped her into the woman standing quietly beside him. There was a magnetic balance of confidence and openness, and it left them both intrigued and hesitant, aware that this connection was rare and fragile. As they spoke, small physical cues punctuated their interaction. Her hand lightly brushing against the ledge as she leaned closer, the faint warmth radiating from her arm as it passed near his, the gentle tilt of her head that invited a response without demanding one. Each movement was measured, intimate, yet perfectly safe, a dance of proximity and awareness that neither of them rushed, but both were keenly attuned to. Internally, he wrestled with the subtle tension. This attraction, quiet and insistent, challenged his usual reserve. He wanted to linger, to extend this rare sense of intimacy. Yet he hesitated, aware of the boundaries of propriety and the unspoken rules of social expectation. Still, every glance, every smile, every brief touch strengthened the unspoken connection between them, building a quiet anticipation that neither could name aloud. By the end of the evening, he realized that these lingering moments, simple as they were, had shifted something inside him. He felt drawn to her in a way that was not merely physical, but profoundly emotional. A curiosity intertwined with admiration, respect, a yearning to understand the woman who had quietly, deliberately, chosen to linger near him longer than anyone else. The room had quieted slightly, the earlier buzz of conversation giving way to softer tones, allowing small gestures to carry far more weight than words. He noticed her again, moving with that effortless grace, and this time there was something different, a deliberate warmth in her attention. She lingered near him, not out of obligation, but with subtle intention, the kind that made ordinary moments feel remarkable. It began with a simple act. She handed him a small plate of snacks, their fingers brushing as he accepted it. It was a fleeting touch, barely noticeable to anyone else, yet left a faint, lingering warmth on his skin. He felt a sudden awareness of her presence, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the quiet steadiness in her posture, the faint scent of her perfume that clung gently to the air around her. It was intimate without being forward, a small connection that felt surprisingly profound. As they continued to talk, her gestures grew more attentive. She adjusted the fold of his sleeve, smoothing a tiny wrinkle with delicate fingers. The action was so minor that it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else, but to him, it carried a gravity that words could not convey. There was a care in her movements, an unspoken reassurance, as if she was quietly affirming that he belonged, here and now, in her attention. He found himself leaning in slightly, drawn by the warmth of her presence. Every detail registered. The soft brush of her hair as she moved, the subtle shift of her weight when she stood near him, the faint smile playing at the corner of her lips that seemed both private and directed at him alone. Her voice carried a gentle rhythm, each word measured yet unforced, drawing him in without effort. He realized that the connection was no longer only visual or emotional. It had begun to translate into the language of touch, of proximity, of quiet intimacy. And yet, there was restraint, mutual, respectful, deliberate. The touches were fleeting but meaningful. A hand on his shoulder as she guided him through a small crowd, a brush of her fingertips as she passed an object across the table. Each contact carried a weight of unspoken sentiment, an acknowledgement of curiosity, admiration, and something deeper that neither of them had yet named. The slow, deliberate pacing of these gestures heightened the tension, allowing anticipation to build naturally rather than being forced. He found himself increasingly aware of how easy it felt to be near her, how her presence seemed to settle him even as it stirred something he could barely define. There was comfort in her touch, And yet it was thrilling, a quiet thrill that hummed beneath the surface of ordinary interactions. Every glance, every small movement reinforced the sense of connection, an invisible thread weaving them closer together without the need for declarations. By the end of these lingering moments, he realized something subtle had shifted. The evening had moved from simple curiosity to a growing intimacy, fragile but undeniable. It was in the warmth of her presence, the quiet attentiveness of her gestures, and the way she lingered, not insistently, but deliberately, near him. In that slow, gentle way, she had begun to open a door he hadn't expected, one that promised something deeper, tender, and profoundly human. The evening had shifted in tone. The easy rhythm of conversation and lingering touches now carried a subtle weight, a tension that neither of them had yet fully named. He noticed it first in the way she hesitated before speaking, the slight pause that lingered longer than necessary, as if measuring the space between them. He, too, felt it, a quiet tug in his chest, an awareness that the connection he had been savoring was suddenly fragile, delicate, and susceptible to missteps. The subtle friction began innocuously. Another guest approached, speaking animatedly, drawing her attention. He watched the warmth in her smile briefly shift towards someone else, and a pang of uncertainty struck him. It was irrational, perhaps even selfish, but he couldn't help noticing how much he valued the moments when her attention was solely his. When she returned her gaze, he felt relief, but also the hint of a question neither of them dared voice. What did this connection mean? As they continued to talk, there were moments when the intimacy of the night collided with the realities of life. Perhaps a comment about her work revealed her depth of experience, reminding him of their age difference, or a fleeting gesture from another admirer nudged his insecurities. He felt his own hesitation rise. Should he lean in closer or step back? Was it simply admiration or something more? The uncertainty added a sharp edge to their interactions, making every glance, every touch, every word carry amplified significance. She, too, showed signs of quiet conflict. Her smiles were tinged with caution, her touches brief yet deliberate. When their fingers brushed, it was electric but fleeting, as if both understood the unspoken rules of restraint. In that delicate dance, they communicated more with pauses and glances than with actual words. He became acutely aware of her subtle vulnerability, the slight furrow in her brow, the soft inhalation before she spoke, the way her eyes held back just enough to leave questions unanswered. Internally, he grappled with a mixture of desire and restraint. The pull toward her was undeniable, yet he could not ignore the potential implications. Social expectations, the whisper of age gap judgments, the fear of overstepping boundaries. And yet, each act of hesitation only seemed to heighten his awareness of her presence, making the brief moments of connection feel even more intimate, more precious. They lingered near each other, caught between what was safe and what they secretly desired. The tension was tangible, almost electric, threading through the quiet gestures, a shoulder brushed, a hand that almost lingered, a look that held just a little longer than casual conversation allowed. In that space, the unspoken truth hovered. They were drawn to each other, yet careful, aware of how fragile such moments could be. By the end of this chapter of the evening, the conflict had not dissolved, but had deepened their bond in unexpected ways. The hesitation, the doubts, the subtle uncertainties, all of it made each moment they shared feel more profound. For him, it was a lesson in patience and awareness, a growing recognition that meaningful connection was rarely simple, and that sometimes the slowest steps carried the most lasting weight.